I'm State Representative Renitta Shannon, and I'm here at the Atlanta Voice.
You are the only woman, right, running for Lieutenant Governor of the state of Georgia. Why did you make that decision?
Well, for me, so let me back up a little bit. Before being elected, I was a successful business executive and also a community organizer. So for me, it's always been about the issues that primarily affect Black and brown communities. And so running for office initially was about wanting to see change and justice on the issues. And so now running for Lieutenant Governor, for me, it is still about the issues. Okay. I wanted to make sure that we would have a strong voice in this race, somebody who is unafraid to speak truth to power and somebody who knows how to get things done. So I'm in the race.
Right. So I know you talked about Black and brown communities. So you're not only just looking out for, those who look like us, but you're thinking about other minorities. Talk about your work with immigrant rights.
Sure. So we have seen relentless attacks on the immigrant community, I would say even before the Trump administration, but certainly it ramped up during the Trump administration. And the argument that I make to folks is there is nothing that has been built for harm for the brown community that won't eventually harm the Black community, and sometimes at the same time. And so I really do see these systems of harm being built for anybody who is not white. It's still the case that policy still reflects and is being built for the folks who have been able to vote the longest, and that's white men. And that's an issue. We have the power to reach for policy that's good for all of us. And I would say that when you create policy that lifts up Black and brown community, everybody does better.
Right. So with knowing that and knowing your type of leadership that you do have and you've shown over the years, tell people why they should vote for you. Why are you the choice, especially in this primary, to get to that point to get ready for the election?
Sure. So I have made my career around knowing policy and being able to find harm in legislation. My colleagues in the House know me as the bill reader, and they call me that because I'm always reading every single piece of legislation that we vote on. I know the policy impacts, and I'm really good at organizing against harm in legislation. And so I do think being a queer Black woman, you have the opportunity to understand exactly where harm is built into legislation, and we are best to protect everybody from harm. And so I would say some of the examples in my career that really show how I operate and how I move would be, for example, in 2020 when the Trump lawyers came before my committee on governmental affairs and tried to get us to throw out all of the votes of Georgians and just give the state to Trump, the electoral votes. I was somebody who spoke up and said, no, we're not going to do that. Other examples, I led the successful effort to expand postpartum Medicaid in the state, which we knew that Black women were 3 to 4 times more likely to die due to maternal mortality. And so because of those efforts, we now have at minimum 6 months of postpartum Medicaid. And so what I'm trying to say is I'm not only somebody who just rests on whether or not we'll have the numbers to defeat bad legislation or advance legislation that we want to see. I am somebody who strategizes and understands how to get it done.
So the Brown Girl's Guide to Politics, you wrote a piece on something like that. Can you kind of explain to the audience what that is?
Yeah, so I wrote a piece, and the piece was titled, Why It Matters to Elect Queer Black Women to Public Office. And I wrote that piece because I was trying to make the point that when you are living at the center of many identities, being a Black person, being a Black woman, being a queer Black woman, you are able to see the harm that may come to all communities. And so having that background allows for better policymaking, better representation, and having that background allows me to better protect all communities.
With your experience, the issues that you have fought for and the issues that you put in the forefront, can you talk about the other issues that matter to you during this campaign so that people understand that you're thinking about all Georgians,
Absolutely. So one of the things that got me into community organizing before being elected and has been a centerpiece of my work at the Capitol has been fighting for economic justice. Workers are the majority in this state, and it's long past time that policy actually reflected that. And so that is something that, the majority of Georgians are workers. People are trying to work to pay their bills. Most folks in the state are not independently wealthy. So I have fought for workers to be paid a livable wage. I've fought against policies that will just make things harder for workers. And so at the end of the day, everybody wants to know that they can pay their bills, they want their families to be safe, and they want to make sure that government is enhancing their life and not making things worse. So that is something that I've fought for that affects pretty much every Georgian. Some of the other issues I fought for look like they may only be centered on the Black community, like police accountability, but a lot of that stuff is about equal justice. And I talk a lot about the effects of seeing, when I was 12 years old, Rodney King being beat by 5 white police officers and then being acquitted by the courts. We've long had a problem in this country with equal justice, and it is something that I think disproportionately affects the Black community, but it really affects all of us, because if people do not feel that they will have a fair shake in our criminal legal system, then we can't have a criminal legal system.
So when you hear the words voter suppression, what do you think, and how are you going to advocate for policy to change that?
Sure. So since 2017, serving in the House, I've been on the Governmental Affairs Committee, which deals with election law. So I've seen every single piece of voter suppression legislation come through that committee, and I've fought every single piece of it. For me, this is about making sure that everyone has equal access to the ballot. I'll give you a great example. SB 202, which was the voter suppression bill that got national attention a couple of years ago, there were provisions in that bill that make it harder for workers to be able to vote. Here's the provision. One provision says that if you cast a provisional ballot during a certain period of time, your ballot will be thrown away. Now, why is this important? It's important because, as we know, rates of housing become unaffordable in Atlanta. People tend to move chasing affordable rent. So when you move, a lot of folks don't realize that your precinct will change. Right, you're shaking your head, so I can tell you know what I'm talking about.
To me personally. Yes.
There you go, exactly. So before SB 202, if you showed up at the wrong precinct because you moved and you didn't realize your precinct changed, they would allow you to fill out a provisional ballot, they would put it into the system, and it would be counted. With this new law, your ballot will be thrown away. And so that targets workers, because workers do not have time to be experts of government, and it also disproportionately hurts the Black community because we are disproportionately represented in the number of minimum wage workers in this country, which means we are a little more transient than folks who are not struggling to pay bills. So it's policies like that that simply just make it harder for workers to vote, harder for Black folks to vote, harder for brown folks to vote, makes it just hard for anybody who is not wealthy and has time to pretty much study government. And so I have fought for everyone to have equal access. I have brought up examples of what these policies really mean in committee and how they create voter suppression. What I've always told people about my service in the House, and what I've always known even before being elected, is that policies are not just words on a piece of paper. Policy has tangible impact in people's lives, and we need to move forward as if that's the case.
Right. So all eyes are on the state of Georgia during this primary as well as the upcoming election for the midterms. How do you feel about how the national media views the state of Georgia, knowing that you've been here, you've been in Congress, you've been doing what you've been doing, and so it's like, no, they've got it wrong here, or no, this is what we're actually doing. Kind of tell us what your point of view of that would be. Sure.
So you're right. Now, recently, people are starting to pay attention to Georgia as if, oh no, Georgia just had an epiphany overnight and they decided to, elect progressive folks to public office. That's not the case. We have long had folks ready to elect progressive leaders. We just have had so much voter suppression in this state, and we also have not had an opportunity to run really, really progressive campaigns. So Georgia has been moving forward towards justice a lot longer than the national media would have you believe. And I think you're going to see that in these elections.
I'm excited about that. And, if there's anything else that you would want our audience to hear from you specifically right now, an issue, something about your campaign, something about your leadership, something about your experience, take the time to tell them right now.
So I would just say to folks, you're going to have a lot of choices on the ballot for lieutenant governor. There is only one person who has been able to fight for your issues, fight for values. There's only one person who has taken some of the toughest fights, like standing up to the Trump lawyers and also getting Medicaid expanded for new moms. I am that person who knows policy, which means I know how to protect you, and you can't protect somebody and you can't fight for communities if you don't even know what legislation means.
Thank you for that. Now tell everyone where they can find you, how they can support you on social media or on your website.
So I am on all social media platforms at RenittaShannon.com, and that's RENITTA Shannon. And then my website is RenittaShannon.com.
Thank you for coming in.
Thank you.